When my girlfriend confessed she'd cheated on me, the world didn't explode like I thought it would. It just went eerily silent, like the air had been sucked out of the room and left me floating somewhere between disbelief and rage. We'd been together for 3 years, through late-night study sessions, broke college dinners, and long drives, where we promised each other we'd never end up like those couples who lose their spark. But life's irony is brutal. I remember sitting across from her at our usual cafe, the one where we'd celebrated birthdays and shared milkshakes, watching her twist the edge of her napkin like she was strangling her own conscience. She said it softly, almost trembling. "I made a mistake. I slept with someone else." The words hit me like ice water. I didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't even blink for a second. My brain just shut down. I'd seen the signs for weeks, the sudden phone screen flips, the late-night study groups, the emotionally distant hugs. Somewhere deep down I already knew, but I'd been too much of a coward to admit it to myself. When the truth finally stood naked between us, I just nodded and said, "Okay," then left. No drama, no scene, just silence. That silence was my shield. For days afterward, she kept trying to reach me, texts, calls, even voice notes, crying and saying she'd ruined everything. I didn't block her. I wanted her to see the message status change from delivered to seen and then nothing else. I wanted her to feel the void she'd created. The first week, I barely slept. I'd replay everything in my head, the inside jokes, the promises, the way she used to look at me like I was her whole world, and then imagine the moment she looked at him the same way. The anger wasn't even about the physical act. It was about trust, about being made to feel like a fool when I had given her every piece of me. But pain can be fuel if you let it burn the right way. So instead of drowning in it, I started rebuilding. I joined the gym, partly to distract myself, partly to punish my body into exhaustion so I wouldn't have the energy to overthink. Every rep, every drop of sweat, every ache felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I deleted old photos, cleaned my room, started focusing on work. I was doing freelance design projects back then. Nothing major, but I threw myself into it like it was a lifeline. Soon, clients started rolling in, and money started coming faster than I'd ever expected. It wasn't overnight success, it was discipline born out of heartbreak. While she was busy posting vague, "don't lose someone who cares" quotes on her story, I was out there turning pain into progress. I wasn't flaunting it, but the glow up was visible. I'd cut my hair, upgraded my wardrobe, started hanging out with better people, and somewhere in that process, I stopped missing her. That's the secret no one tells you. One day you just stop replaying the betrayal in your head. It becomes a memory instead of a wound. Months later, mutual friends told me she wasn't doing well. She'd fallen into depression, barely attending classes, losing weight, shutting herself off. At first, I felt guilty. I'm not heartless. I'd loved that girl. But then I reminded myself, I didn't put her there. She did. Cheating might feel like a temporary thrill, but its aftermath is a slow-burning guilt that eats away at the soul. I guess she learned that the hard way. My friends kept saying, "Bro, she regrets it now," but regret doesn't fix broken trust. It only highlights the mistake. I never wished her pain, but I wasn't going to save her from the consequences either. That was her journey, not mine. Then came the party. It was one of those end-of-semester get-togethers. Nothing big, just familiar faces and music too loud for small talk. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. When I walked in, I could feel the shift. People looked at me differently now. I wasn't the quiet, heartbroken guy anymore. I carried myself differently, talked differently. Success, confidence, peace, they change your aura in ways you don't notice until others do. And then I saw her. She was sitting in a corner, thinner, eyes tired, holding a drink she wasn't even sipping. For a moment, time froze. She stood up and walked towards me, and the crowd noise faded. "Hey," she said softly, You look good." There was a sad smile tugging at her lips. I just nodded. She started talking about how she'd been depressed, how she hadn't been able to forgive herself, how she missed the way things used to be. I listened not to her words, but to the tone, the guilt, the longing. When she finally paused, waiting for me to say something, I said, "You broke me once, but fixing myself was the best thing I ever did." Her eyes watered. She whispered, "I know, I ruined everything." Maybe she wanted me to say I still cared, but I didn't know her that anymore. I just told her, "We both learned our lessons. Yours came with guilt, mine came with growth." She nodded, and for a brief second, I saw the girl I once loved. Human, flawed, broken. But love and forgiveness aren't the same thing. I wished her well and walked away. Not out of arrogance, but because the past doesn't deserve a place in the future you've worked hard to build. As I stepped outside, the night air hit differently. I realized revenge doesn't always come with shouting or slamming doors. It can come in the form of peace. My revenge wasn't about making her hurt the way she hurt me. It was about showing her that losing me was the worst consequence of her choices. She'd thrown away a version of me that was soft, naive, and forgiving, but she'd also created a version that was strong, focused, and unstoppable. Maybe she saw that. Maybe that's why she cried as I left. I didn't hate her anymore. In fact, I silently thanked her, because sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who push you to become something greater. As I walked home under the orange glow of streetlights, headphones in, heart steady, I realized the final stage of revenge isn't triumph, it's indifference. I had finally reached that point.
After that night at the party, something shifted inside me. Closure wasn't loud, it was quiet. Like a final door closing softly behind you while you keep walking forward without turning back. But of course, life loves testing you after you think you've healed. 2 months later, she texted again. One of those late-night messages that just says, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for 10 minutes, half tempted to ignore it, half curious about what new form of regret she wanted to unload on me. I finally replied, "About what?" And she instantly called. Her voice was shaking, fragile, the kind that belongs to someone who hasn't slept properly in weeks. She told me she'd been diagnosed with anxiety, that she couldn't stop thinking about how she'd destroyed the one good thing she had, that every time she saw my name anywhere, it felt like punishment. I listened quietly. Part of me felt sorry. Part of me wanted to remind her that she'd built her own storm. She asked if we could meet just once for closure. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe because deep down, curiosity still lived where love used to. We met at the same cafe where everything had fallen apart, and when I saw her, I barely recognized the girl I'd once adored. She looked smaller somehow, her confidence stripped, her smile mechanical. We talked. She told me about therapy, about sleepless nights, about losing her appetite and her focus. She said she'd realized the guy she cheated with had ghosted her 2 weeks after, and that since then she'd been spiraling, blaming herself. I didn't mock her or say, "You deserved it." I just said, sometimes we break things we can't fix. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said, "I wish you hated me. It would be easier than knowing you're over me." That line stuck with me because it was true. My calmness scared her more than my anger ever could. I left that meeting with mixed emotions, sympathy, relief, and a strange sense of victory that didn't feel like winning, but like surviving. The months rolled on, and my life kept leveling up. I had moved into a better apartment, launched my own freelance brand, and even started collaborating with bigger clients. My glow-up wasn't just physical, it was emotional armor forged from every ounce of pain she'd given me. People who used to overlook me now sought my advice. And in that success, I started seeing a pattern, how sometimes heartbreak is a brutal teacher, but also the best mentor. Meanwhile, she lingered on the edges of my social circle, occasionally liking my posts, sending heart emojis on stories, or dropping subtle comments like, "So proud of you." I never replied, and that silence became my loudest statement. Then came the twist. Her best friend, Mia, someone I'd always gotten along with platonically, started talking to me more often. We'd bump into each other at mutual events, chat casually, and she'd occasionally vent about how my ex had changed, how depression had swallowed her confidence. I didn't ask for details, but Mia kept mentioning how she still cried about me, how she still stalked my profile late at night. It was like my existence had turned into her mirror of regret. One evening, Mia and I ended up at the same small get-together, and as the night faded, we found ourselves talking on the balcony about everything. Life, betrayal, forgiveness, and pain. She told me, "You didn't just move on, you evolved." And that sentence hit me deep. Maybe I did. That night, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and I didn't pull away. It wasn't romantic. It was two broken people acknowledging that pain doesn't have to define you. A week later, though gossip spread, my ex found out that Mia and I had been hanging out, and she exploded. She called me, screaming, accusing me of doing this to hurt her. I calmly said, "I didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourself." She cried again, said she'd been having panic attacks, that seeing me happy made her feel worthless. I didn't even know what to say. Revenge had turned into something darker now, not because I sought it, but because life was giving it to her in doses I didn't ask for. Guilt crept in. I wasn't proud of her pain, but I also couldn't deny the poetic justice of it all. Every sleepless night she now had was one I'd already lived through months ago. Still, I decided to cut all communication for good. I blocked her, unfollowed mutuals, and disappeared from her digital orbit. I didn't need to witness her downfall anymore. My revenge was complete, not because she suffered, but because I no longer cared whether she did. Then, months later, fate decided to write one last ironic chapter. I got invited to give a talk at a local business seminar for young freelancers, sharing my story of failure, growth, and success. It was surreal standing there, microphone in hand, telling a crowd how heartbreak had taught me discipline and focus. After the event, someone approached me. It was her mother. I hadn't seen her since college. She hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for not ruining her publicly. She's been trying to heal." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded politely. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was her. "Mom told me she saw you today. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm in therapy now. I finally forgive myself." I read it twice, smiled faintly, and deleted it. No reply needed. Closure isn't about answers. It's about peace. Looking back, I realized revenge doesn't always end with the other person's pain. Sometimes it ends with their realization and your freedom. I had gotten both. The boy who once begged for love was gone. In his place stood a man who understood that loyalty is priceless and self-respect is non-negotiable. And even though she'd spiraled into depression after cheating on me, my revenge wasn't the suffering she endured. It was the life I built without her. Every success, every smile, every night of undisturbed sleep was proof that healing is the loudest revenge of all.
Time moved differently after that. Without the weight of the past dragging behind me, everything started feeling lighter, quieter, and strangely balanced. I'd stopped checking my phone for her messages long ago, stopped wondering what she was doing, who she was talking to, or if she still cried at night. Healing had become my new addiction. Waking up early, hitting the gym, running my business, building new routines. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was just building the life I once begged her to dream with me. But the world has a strange way of looping people back into your story just when you've started a new chapter. One evening, while attending a networking event in another city, I ran into her again. She wasn't the same girl who had broken me, She looked calmer, maybe wiser, dressed neatly in a professional outfit, carrying a small notebook instead of that anxious, defensive look she used to wear. She smiled faintly when she saw me, the kind of smile people give when they know words won't bridge the distance time has built. I didn't feel anger anymore, just curiosity. We ended up talking briefly, and to my surprise, she congratulated me on my success. She said, "You really made something of yourself, and I mean that sincerely." There was no tremor in her voice, no hidden agenda, just truth. I thanked her, and for the first time, it felt like two old ghosts meeting in daylight. She told me she'd been volunteering at a mental health center, trying to help others deal with guilt and anxiety. That caught me off guard. Maybe she was trying to make sense of her own pain by helping others heal theirs. She didn't ask for forgiveness anymore, didn't try to reopen old wounds. She simply said, "I hope you're happy." I told her, "I am," and I meant it. We parted ways that night, without exchanging numbers, without any promises to keep in touch. It was strange, seeing her no longer hurt, no longer toxic, no longer mine. For the first time, her story didn't feel connected to my identity anymore. But the irony of life is that peace often brings clarity, and clarity brings unexpected emotions. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about how far we'd both come. Maybe revenge had served its purpose, but growth had taken over. I realized I didn't need her to be miserable for me to feel healed. My revenge had evolved, from proving her wrong to proving myself right. A few months later, my business took off even more. I was featured in a local magazine for young entrepreneurs, and the cover story was titled, "From Heartbreak to Hustle." I laughed when I saw it, thinking how cliché it sounded, but it was real. That feature brought me recognition, clients, and a new level of confidence. I started mentoring younger freelancers, helping them avoid the mistakes I'd made. Life had become stable, fulfilling, and grounded. But even in the calm, echoes of the past sometimes whispered through, like a faint melody you can't completely forget. Late one night, scrolling through social media, I stumbled across her post. A quote that read, "Sometimes you have to lose someone to find yourself." It didn't sting anymore. Instead, it felt like closure from her side, too. She had finally accepted what I'd known all along. Pain can destroy or rebuild you, depending on what you do with it. Then came something I didn't expect. Mia, her old best friend, the one who had become my casual confidant, started appearing more in my life. We weren't dating, not really, but there was a quiet understanding between us. She respected my space, admired my focus, and never once compared herself to the shadow of my past. One evening, after a long day, we sat at a rooftop cafe watching city lights. She said, "You know, you're not the same person I met last year. You've healed beautifully." I smiled and said, "Pain matures you faster than time." It wasn't a flirtatious conversation, but it was intimate in a peaceful way. I could see in her eyes that she cared, not as someone trying to replace my past, but as someone who appreciated my present. That's when I realized revenge stories don't always end with a grand finale. They fade into acceptance, into quiet companionship, into people who show you that healing is worth it. Weeks later, news reached me through mutuals that my ex had moved abroad for work. She was doing better, apparently thriving in her career, and had even started speaking publicly about mental health recovery. It didn't surprise me. She was always smart, always capable. I smiled at the irony that both of us had used the same heartbreak as fuel for success, just in different ways. My revenge was never about destroying her. It was about outgrowing the version of me that needed her validation. And now, as I looked at where we stood, two people who had broken each other, rebuilt separately, and learned lessons they couldn't have learned otherwise, I felt something close to gratitude. Maybe that's what true closure feels like, when the story that once burned you now warms you instead. Still, part of me couldn't help but think how different things might have been if she hadn't cheated. Maybe we'd still be together, maybe not. But those maybes
didn't matter anymore. Life had taken me places I never would have reached if not for that heartbreak. The scars she left behind had become proof that I could survive anything. And that's when I realized the final truth of revenge. It's not about winning. It's about evolving so far beyond your pain that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant in your narrative. I'd outgrown the boy who once cried over unanswered texts. Now I was a man who could wish her well and still sleep soundly at night. The story that started with betrayal had transformed into a testament of resilience. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best kind of revenge after all.
It's funny how life keeps writing new chapters, even when you think your story is finished. A year passed since that last encounter with her, and by then I had become someone completely different, a man who had rebuilt his confidence, his future, and most importantly, his peace. My business had grown into something stable. I was hiring a small team, mentoring interns, and collaborating with people I'd once dreamed of working with. Somewhere between the late nights and early mornings, I realized I no longer carried the ache of what happened. But one quiet evening, while scrolling through emails, a name popped up that froze me for a second. It was hers. The subject line read, "Thank you." For a moment, I debated even opening it. But curiosity won. Her message wasn't long. She wrote that she had been doing well, that she had found meaning in helping others, and that she finally understood the damage she'd caused back then. "You taught me accountability without cruelty," she wrote, "and I just wanted to say thank you for walking away instead of trying to destroy me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That message wasn't for me. It was for her own peace. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. Revenge had come full circle, no longer sharp or vengeful, but calm and reflective. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about closure that no apology could have provided years ago. But life, unpredictable as always, wasn't done yet. 2 months later, I was invited as a speaker at an international design summit. When I got to the venue, I checked the guest list, and my heart skipped for just a second. She was listed as one of the panel moderators. I almost laughed at the coincidence. The day of the event, when our paths crossed again, she greeted me with a professional handshake, confident and poised, her eyes holding none of that past guilt. She introduced me on stage, smiling genuinely as she said, "Our next speaker turned pain into power, and I think that's something we can all learn from." That line hit harder than she probably intended. As I gave my talk about resilience, creativity, and using adversity as fuel, I caught her looking at me. Not with regret this time, but with respect. It was strange, almost poetic, how our story had gone from heartbreak to professional admiration. After the event, we talked briefly in the lobby. She said, "You've really changed." I smiled and replied, "So have you." There was no tension, no ghosts between us, just two people who had finally outgrown the worst versions of themselves. Later that night, as I sat by the hotel window watching city lights flicker like memories, I realized the entire journey had been one long lesson about emotional evolution. When she cheated, I thought revenge would fix the pain, that seeing her broken, depressed, or regretful would somehow heal me. But revenge doesn't heal. It only distracts. What truly heals is growth, the kind that doesn't demand validation, the kind that silently transforms you until even your scars start looking like strength. The boy who once stared at his phone waiting for her apology was gone. In his place stood a man who didn't need closure to move forward. And that realization, more than success, more than peace, was the ultimate revenge. Because true revenge is indifference, wrapped in self-respect. Months passed after the summit, and every once in a while I'd see her name pop up in articles or interviews about mental health advocacy. She was doing well, and for the first time, that made me happy. It meant the story had truly ended where it was supposed to, with both of us better, not bitter. I'd moved on completely by then. I'd even met another person, a girl named Rachel. Kind-hearted, honest, and refreshingly real. There was no drama, no guessing games, no hidden guilt, just calmness. She once asked me if I still thought about my ex, and I told her, only as the person who taught me what not to settle for. Rachel smiled and said, "Then she did her job." I laughed because she was right. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every sleepless night,
They all shape you into the kind of person you were supposed to be before the world tested your limits. One evening, while Rachel and I were having dinner, she showed me a quote online that read, "Revenge is never personal. It's evolution disguised as pain." I smiled quietly because that line summarized everything I'd lived through. My girlfriend's betrayal had once been my worst nightmare, but it had also been my rebirth. Without it, I'd still be the insecure version of myself, trying too hard to please others instead of respecting my own boundaries. Her depression, her guilt, her attempts to seek forgiveness, those were her lessons. Mine was to rise, rebuild, and never let someone's betrayal define my worth again. And maybe that's how all revenge stories should end. Not with someone suffering, but with both people learning who they truly are. As I walked Rachel home that night, hand in hand, the streetlights glowing softly around us, I realized I had finally outgrown revenge. The word didn't even fit anymore. What I had achieved wasn't revenge. It was redemption. I didn't destroy anyone. I rebuilt myself. I didn't make her pay. I made myself priceless. And that's the difference between revenge that burns and revenge that heals. The first consumes you. The second transforms you. So when people ask me now about that old relationship, I don't roll my eyes or tell dramatic stories. I just say, she was the lesson that turned into my blessing. Because she was. The girl who cheated on me taught me to be loyal to myself first. The one who broke me gave me the reason to rebuild. And somewhere in that full circle of love, loss, pain, and peace, I found something better than revenge. I found myself.